In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davis. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. I am thrilled to welcome my guest today, Margot Faraci. Margot is a seasoned leader with over 2 decades of experience in the corporate world. I had the privilege of working with Margot in my time at CommBank. Margot's worked with some of the largest blue chip companies in Australia and internationally. She's known for her ability to spearhead cultural transformation in many diverse settings. She thrives as a change agent and blends her high performance with meaningful transformation, and I have witnessed this in person. Margot's a thought leader, and through her philosophy of addressing fear with love, she advocates for love leadership, which is a concept I adore and we're going to chat more about today. It's a powerful approach that creates authentic transformation and delivers exceptional financial results. She empowers leaders to abandon outdated patterns of fearful leadership and embrace love as a transformative force, unlocking both individual and organizational potential. Welcome to the show, Margot.
Hi, Ange. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I want to just start, back at the beginning. Your career spans leading global companies through cultural and operational transformations. I saw it myself in what you did when you came into CBA. But what initially sparked your passion for being a change agent in the corporate world? And I think with you particularly, you really challenged the status quo, which I love to see. So what sort of sparked your passion to do that?
Well, I could just see a better way to live. I could see a better way to lead, and I could see an easier path to performance. Now, that sounds crazy, but, I was taught, I think, like so many people, in our 20s when we first start in our corporate careers, we get taught a certain way, but at the end of the day, we become our leaders ourselves and we have to find our own way. And so what I was taught, ultimately, I tried to put in place myself as a leader. But in the end, I really came back to myself and went the way that I thought was right. And when I talk about leading with love, I talk about being brave, clear and fair, not being a pleaser. There's nothing flaky about love. It's the most powerful emotion we have, and it's about loving ourselves first to be more confident. But at the end of the day, this is what drives performance. We now know that psychological safety, the creation of psychological safety, is the single biggest driver of performance once you've chosen the right, capable team. And that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about leading with love, being brave, clear and fair, so that you're stepping into your power, I'm stepping into my power, and everyone around us is stepping into their power as well.
I love that. And I want to explore a little bit more about love leadership. So you spoke a little bit about love leadership. It's obviously your core philosophy. Can you explain a little bit more about what that philosophy means? You mentioned sort of clear, etc., but can you just talk a little bit more deeply about it and why you think it's critical for leaders to lead this way?
Well, at the end of the day, it's critical because we have to perform, Ange. So we have to deliver. I was always in charge of P&Ls. I had big frontline teams. I was a banker myself, first of all. I was a lawyer before that, my goodness. Was really bad at it. I would have been now what I call a really nice underperformer. Great fun, but didn't really do it. Someone should have told me. I would have left earlier. But in the end, I went into banking and I was good at that. But I started as a banker and I needed to get to know my clients and help them make money. And that was how I was going to make money and therefore get promoted and do a good job. And then I ran frontline teams and up to, sort of 1,400, 1,500 people across 200 locations. and really had to deliver. So it's critical for performance. Now, when I talk about love, you've seen it in action. So I'm going to talk about a couple of examples that you would have seen when you were working with me. And they're really pertinent because I met you just as I discovered this love-fear dichotomy and made a commitment to myself to leading with love. So here's what happened. I went through my banking career, as I said, as a frontline banker, and then leading teams of frontline bankers, did a bit of other stuff as well. But by the time I turned 40, I was pretty miserable and kind of burnt out, and had time. So I decided to take a break. My biggest fear was irrelevance, being, not getting people to return my calls. And guess what? When I was ready to come back into the corporate world, that's exactly what happened. The gift is when your biggest fears are realised, they kind of can't get any worse. So,
yeah, there's only up. It's only up from here.
And what it pushed me, once I had a break and was irrelevant and couldn't get calls returned to come back in, and I really needed to. Like, we had kids at school and, we needed my income. So it was kind of panicky, but I decided to just move with intention, but also surrender to the circumstances. And what that meant was that gave me a lot of time to reflect, more time than I bargained on why I was doing what I was doing and what had led to the burnout. And what I realised, the more I read, the more I saw, the more I thought about myself, the more I saw around me, is that really human beings are only ever motivated by fear or by love. Everything we do is motivated by fear or by love. And what I'd been doing is allowing the fear response to drive my actions. And so what that meant was fear drives a flight, fight, or freeze response. And I'd always gone into flight or freeze. And so the fight response is the one that we often see in the corporate world and we can all relate to, which is bosses being aggressive or people being aggressive with each other. That wasn't ever really my response. But when I was met with that, or when I had a challenging situation, I would either go into flight, which is just work around it, work harder, work around it, or freeze and avoid, and that's actually what led to the burnout, because I wasn't being my true self, And so when I went back in, finally I did go back in, and I was working with you as my very valued HR partner. And there are a couple of situations in there that you would have seen where I just made this massive commitment to myself that every time I felt the fear response, I was going to notice it and decide what to do and try and choose a love response. So here's a couple of examples. The fear response, the gift of fear is vigilance. So if I'm having a fear response, it means I'm trying to keep myself safe, right? So that's the first thing to notice. There's no shoulds about it. We have fear. But it's going to make us small. And it's going to mean that we don't step into who we really are. And my experience is, and my very fundamental belief is, the more we are ourselves, the more powerful we are and the better we perform. So fear response was, I did have a leader when I was in that period who really was trying to micromanage me. And he second-guessed everything I did. The business was performing extremely well. That was great for him. It was the fastest growing business in the bank, I think, at the time. The business was performing very well. I was leading in a way that was very different to my leader, and that leader kept questioning me. And in the end, I decided the fear response was to put up with it and pretend it was okay, but I knew where that would lead. That would lead to resentment and burnout. So in the end, I stepped into it, and I just sat down with him and said, "Do you actually trust me to do my job?" And that was a hard thing for me to do, but it cleared the air. I mean, my leader was absolutely horrified that they had given me the impression that they didn't trust me. They just didn't know that what the impact of what they were doing was, but it was actually driving me to be small, and no one needs that. No one needs that. Another love response was really stepping into, when I went into the team, there were a couple in there that my colleagues in head office thought were quite problematic. And one in particular, I sat him down and told him that my observation was he was not supported by head office. He'd done a lot wrong. But my observation was he was really, really good at his job. And actually there was a disconnection between what he was doing out in the field with his people and his clients and his potential for performance and what actually was being seen in head office. So we made a commitment together to rectify that, and he became my top performer. And another guy who was performing well but was being pretty disrespectful to me. So 6 weeks in, I just pulled him into head office and just said, you're being disrespectful to me. And in that sense, you're being disrespectful to yourself, and I won't have it. So, I could see you're a brilliant banker. I could see you're big in your community. They're all important things. But unless you treat me the right way, we can't work together. So I support you. I think you're brilliant, but not this way. And they're all things that I think in the past I might have got to eventually, but coming back with this real intention around loving myself enough to speak what was authentic for me, but also loving everyone around me enough to be clear with them and true with them and trusting them enough. I mean, that's important. And that's what drove performance in the end. And we had a terrific time.
Yeah. And I think, I hear a lot, and I think this is your philosophy, is that clear is kind. I think, though, having those early conversations, particularly with your leader, takes a lot of courage, right? It's very easy to let fear take hold in those situations. How did you have the courage to continue to drive through and have that conversation?
Well, if you're not doing it, it's probably because you haven't been miserable enough, and this is a podcast ultimately about work and wellness and not being yourself. And when I say yourself, I don't mean turning up to Zooms in pajamas. What I mean is, there's a whole lot of authenticity at the moment that is actually just flaky and unprofessional.
Too far. I think it's gone too far.
Like, at the end of the day, guys, we're getting paid. We need to show up professionally.
Don't bring your whole self to work.
Not your whole self. Not everyone needs to know everything all the time. But in terms of I had to see it, the way to get through it. I'm not saying it's easy, and it wasn't easy for me, but the way to get through is to say to yourself, what is the greatest good I can do in this moment? What is the highest good? I like this guy. I think he's a good guy. He's driving me bonkers. He's driving, and maybe he knows it, maybe he doesn't. But I actually think it's better for him. I'm going to love myself enough to step into who I am. I'm at my best when I'm autonomous. And I pull my leader down when I need some help. But other than that, let me at it. And I want to have a really good relationship with him. So the way to do it is to think about the highest good you can possibly do in this situation. The highest good I can do for the business is actually have a really strong, trusting relationship with him. And that involves intimacy. And intimacy is, having respectful conflict. So I stated my intention at the start when I had that conversation with him. I said, my intention is to have a really strong relationship with you for the good of the business and for the good of us each. And so that's why I'm asking you, do you actually trust me to do my job? I also had the confidence of knowing he'd chosen me. Like, I went through a review process. And I thought, well, mate, you chose me. So you invited this in, whether you knew consciously or not, you invited this in. And yes, absolutely, I have been a change agent, but I've always done it respectfully. People have good reasons for behaving the way they do, and they're just trying to meet their needs as well. So respect and compassion always when we're having those conversations.
I think that's great advice. You mentioned before you took on this role that you were feeling a bit burnt out. Talk to me about that a little bit more, and then how did you work to rectify that burnout? Aside from coming in to lead with love and sort of being more authentic in yourself, how did you tackle that burnout? Because it can take quite some time to recover from burnout.
Yeah, so I was actually out of the game for 18 months in the end, and I thought maybe 6 months. I mean, at the start, I never thought I could go back in. I was just collapsed. I was just so tired and really unwell. So a couple of gifts, I call them, which sometimes are things that you don't want to receive, but you find the gifts of them. So along the way, I had a couple of really horrific experiences interviewing for roles, and one of them was so bad that it actually drove me to, it was just, I did 8 hours of psychologist interviews, testing, all that sort of stuff. Then the next day I went and did 8 hours of interviews and then did not hear a thing for 5 weeks. I was working with a really senior leader in a bank. So number one, boundaries. When that leader actually rang me and offered me the job, in the moment, I had nothing else on the go, nothing in the pipeline. I'd been out of work for, I think, 12 months by this stage. No one was calling. This was the only opportunity I had. But in the moment when and all I wanted was for him to offer me that job, and he rang me and he did after not saying anything for 5 weeks and me following him up and not actually acknowledging that he kept me waiting. In the moment, I just set a boundary around how I was prepared to be treated. And I thought, if this is how you treat me on the way in, imagine how you're going to treat me.
Yeah.
Whether intentionally or not, I'm not going to work for someone who's so blind. So there was a bound. So I said no. I had absolutely nothing on the go, but I set the boundary around myself first. And what you find is that when you set your boundaries around yourself first, it's not selfish, it's self-care. And it means you can show up so much better for everyone. In the end, it's in service to everyone else. So those boundaries about who I was going to work with and what I was prepared to do and for what money were really important. So that's the first thing. It's not easy. After I left, actually, the reason we stopped working together, you and I, is because I got poached to go back to another bank. And I sat in front of the CEO of that bank when they called me over, and I said, if you want me, it has to be on the terms that make sense for me. So I'm not going to be on a plane every week. And I've got a personal mobile now and a work mobile. And the work mobile goes off at 6:00 every night and all weekend. So if you call me, you can call me on my personal mobile, but you'll know you're doing that. And the CEO actually said, I can't believe we lost you in the first place. Come back. We just do it your way. So massive improvements for me on setting. If I can sit in front of the ASX top 10 CEO and say that to them, that became very good. So setting boundaries about who, what, where, and how much.
Yep.
Then setting boundaries about in the moment, about availability. I do remember that boss that we referred to before that we both know saying to me, God, you can be hard to catch, Margot, But that's because he was calling me at 8:00 at night.
Yeah.
I had 2 kids in primary school. Go away.
Yeah.
If they're done in work hours.
There's a problem with your systems if that's the case.
Yeah. If you can't get a day, he had kids at primary school too. So what's he doing? So, and I got everything done and we had a high performing team. So don't call me at 8:00. Of course I'm hard to catch at 8:00. So I said that to him. And set boundaries around what meetings I attend to. So it's not just, and that's not about being passive aggressive and just saying flat no. It's about saying, well, what's the outcome you want from me there? Because you can you can spend 10 hours a day for 30 years in meetings and call it a career.
Yeah.
You can, and be really, really ineffective. And so I would question a lot about, why do you need me there? I'm happy to come, if you think I've got value to add or if you think it's going to affect me, but tell me why. And then, so really strong boundaries around how I spent my time. A big gift of that interview process that was quite horrific was it drove me into meditation. So now that's the first thing I do. If I'm not exercising first thing in the morning, I'm doing meditation. That has been a huge help to me. Anyone out there who's listening, it's not, people say I can't meditate because my mind's busy. Yeah, so is mine. But it's not about how you feel in the moments that you're meditating. It's about what happens outside the meditation. So that's a huge discipline for me now. And I think the consciousness around what's acceptable to me and what isn't, and how to really drive performance. I mean, what happens is when you start looking after yourself, setting boundaries, looking after your own time, you turn up clear, focused and fun.
Yeah,
without
I
the
love
resentment,
that.
without the push, without the anxiety. And things just open up. It is absolutely incredible. So they're the things that I did, and I just decided they were the things that were important to me at that stage. Now it's different. My kids are older, I've pretty much raised them, in inverted commas. And I work all times of the day and night. I do what suits me, and that's really fun too. But I had different priorities then.
Yeah. I think what's awesome about that is how you mentioned that it actually helps you to turn up clearer and more fun. And I think there's a bit of a misconception that if you put these boundaries in place, you're not going to be a high performer. You're kind of there to do your hours and go. Can you talk a little bit more about how you manage the tension between delivering commercial outcomes, but then also managing your own boundaries? Because I think that's probably a question a lot of people have. How do you do both? Now, my view is the better you turn up, the better the outcomes are. But a lot of people, I think you've got to put all of that extra time in and almost get to burnout before you can do that.
Yeah, well, I don't accept the premise that there is tension between the two. I don't accept that. I think one drives the other. So I think through my own experience and through helping other people and through running businesses to performance, that the more I look after myself, the better I perform. And we had fun. I mean, Angie, you worked with me. We had fun. It's fun. The work should be fun. Now, that's if you're in the right job. If you're not in the right job, no amount of self-care in law would have had me turn up clear focused and fun. I hated it. It wasn't good for me. It was the wrong thing. But if you're in the right job that you feel strongly purposeful about and you feel that you're good enough at and that you're keen to do better, you're purposeful about it. If you've got a craft that you really take pride in, then there is no tension. The self-care drives performance. That there would be tension between self-care and performance is a premise I do not accept. It is a myth. Now, there's a difference between this and taking the mickey.
Yes.
There's a big difference between, and I don't tolerate the latter. I do not tolerate the latter. So when I'm employing people, I look for decent, clever, and committed. And the committed bit is something you can't coach. It's either it's someone or it isn't.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that will see you through the good and the bad times. And when I say clever, it's clever in the job. A lot of people who are really clever lawyers wouldn't be able to do banking, and vice versa. So it's clever for the job. Or, sometimes in jobs, clever means high EQ or whatever that is. And so the committed bit is not coachable. The decent bit is something that if you create decency in the system, people will follow it. People will understand what decency means. But the commitment bit is uncoachable. And so I don't believe I need to take responsibility for my team's motivation. My job is to create the right emotional climate with psychological safety. But their job, if I'm choosing someone and we're going to work together, then they need to be even more committed to their success than I am.
I think that's such a great point you raised there, Margot, because I think particularly a lot of first-time leaders, I believe, think their job is to motivate their team to get those outcomes. Yeah. So what would you say to a new leader about that? How they sort of change their perspective to think, hold on, it's the individual's job to motivate themselves. What would you say to them?
So what we know is that in emerging leaders, so we've got 2,500 respondents across the US, the UK and Australia. What we know in that emerging leader cohort that you've just referred to, the biggest block to performance is these emerging leaders thinking they have to rescue their team. So rescuing means taking responsibility for someone else's commitment, taking responsibility for your team's outcomes, or the individual contributor's outcomes. So my job as a leader is to create the right emotional climate, that is psychological safety. That means I ask for help, I say when I'm wrong, I step into difficult situations and clear them up. Big problem in corporate Australia, the avoidance, the fear-based avoidance. That's the biggest tip I can give to emerging leaders is if you see it, do something about it. If you don't know how, get help, go onto my socials, all that sort of stuff. There's all stuff there about having courageous conversations respectfully and with compassion. So that's number one. But then number two, you can't change someone else. You can't take responsibility for someone else's motivation. You are responsible for creating the right climate for motivation. We know that the three aspects of motivation are climate, that's the leader's job, the probability of success of someone, and then the rewards of success. So if we think about my probability of success as a lawyer, looking back, I just had the wrong kind of brain for it. I mean, law school was interesting, but you have to love pointing out risk if you you have to be a good lawyer. And I'm like the one who wants to get the deal done. So that's not me. And so the probability of success for me was low. And the rewards of success, I didn't want to be a partner in a law firm. The rewards of success were not there. I wasn't prepared to put in what needed to be done. Now, when I got into banking, the probability of success was higher for me. I enjoyed it more. I loved being with clients. I loved helping them solve problems. I loved getting the deal done. So the probability was higher. And the rewards was high. I could look up and see people that I wanted to emulate. And that for me meant, I was prepared to put in the work. So if you think about motivation as emotional climate, probability of success and rewards of success, it's only the emotional climate that you as the leader can take responsibility for. The rest are up to the individual. So when you're hiring, you need to go for that.
Yeah, that's great advice. I want to know, I think a lot of leaders struggle with authenticity. If I reflect back to my time in banking, there was times where I was coached to continue to be more polished. And I think it's quite interesting.
I'm surprised at that. I really want to get into that. Maybe when you come onto my podcast, we'll talk about that. Wow. Okay.
Look, I think it was a function of having multiple very polished leaders in a row. And so
Yeah.
there was certainly that expectation. Interestingly, when I went to the last corporate role I did, they said, I've got to knock this polish out of you. I was like, for God's sakes, what do people want from me? Do they want me
Yeah.
to be polished or not?
Yeah.
So, thankfully in this current work, I'm able to be myself and really enjoy it. But a lot of leaders do struggle with authenticity because I think they expect in a corporate high stakes environment, they have to portray a certain thing or be a certain way. I feel you're the queen of authenticity, Margot. You're such an authentic leader. I adored working with you because you were so authentic and unapologetically so. How do you encourage leaders to bring their authentic selves to work? And I think, like we said before, not your whole self. We don't need to know every nitty gritty thing and see people in their pajamas. But how do you encourage people to come in authentically and lead?
Well, what's right for me is not right. What's right for you. So I think authenticity comes from trusting yourself and really, as I said, just thinking in every moment, what's the highest good I can do here? And the highest good we can all do for each other is listen really well. I had to learn that. Listen really well, and then and respond from the highest self. And that's what I really take great pains to do that. And so that's what being authentic is. And that doesn't mean everyone has to be. I mean, some of the best leaders I've worked with are the ones who don't say much at all, and that's authentic for them. But when they say something, everyone leans in.
Yeah.
So that's authentic for them. Some of the best leaders I've worked with are teachers. Like, I'm not very patient, so if you're going to come work with me and you don't know the craft, I'm probably going to pair you with a buddy who can teach you because I'm not very good at that. So, and it's about authenticity in the moment as well. So knowing, as you said, and this is all judgment. We get it wrong all the time. I get it wrong all the time, but it's the trying that makes you great. The authenticity to state when you're having trouble, the authenticity to state when I need help. They're all things I had to learn, because I thought my job was to be autonomous, and that was certainly my default setting. But there were times I needed to ask for help too, and what I found is that actually just drew my team closer to me and made us put us in the trenches together, which was lovely. But we look around in our early years in our careers, we look around and say, who can I learn from? Who can I learn from? That's all valid and important. But I remember my best friend, she's quite senior at a global tech, and I remember we got to about 42 and went, I just look up, and I'm not that inspired by who I see above. And then we looked at each other and said, maybe it's us now. Oh my God. So you get to a point where there is no choice about authenticity because I am who I am.
Yeah. Do you know, I resonate with that so much, Margot. I was actually saying to Liam, my husband, on our walk, I have never felt in my life more settled in just being who I am than I do right now. And I think a lot of that actually comes from being silent and sitting with yourself. When I was working in corporate, I felt like I never allowed myself time to sit. I was going to the gym at 4:45, going straight to work, doing all of that, running home, working after hours. And what I've come to realize, and I'd be keen for your thoughts on this, is that actually sitting in silence and solitude is probably one of the best ways, in my perspective, to be your authentic self, because you get to sit with yourself and really know who you are. And I think when you're moving so quickly, you don't really ever get to sit and understand who you are. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's right. Leading up to that sort of burnout period when I turned 40, which is now 9 years ago, I'd never really done, I'd been working since I was 14, I'd high school, law school, all that, and I'd never really done it. And meditating means you just meet more of yourself. Having difficult experiences means you meet more of yourself as well. And they're really, really important. It's the only way to understand your fears and really get across them. So there's a really neat, my coach, Tanya Diesel at A Spiral, taught me that I now work with people on, which is finding the gifts of a situation. So that doesn't mean as soon as something happens, trying to make it a positive thing. It means you've still got to move through the change curve. You've still got to feel what you feel. You've got to process your feelings. But there'll come a point where you're sick of feeling upset, and that's when you go into finding the gifts, and you learn so much about yourself if you just write an A4 page of the gifts in silence. But sitting with yourself, it brings out who you really are. Getting feedback from teenagers and what triggers your mind up is pretty sobering as well. Find out who you are. why does it bother me? Why does it bother me? Why does it bother me that she's doing this or he's doing that, or they're not following the path that I thought they would follow? Of course they're not, because they're not me.
Yeah.
So find out why things bother you. It's not the rest of the world with the problem. Why does something bother me so much? And understanding that, and not judging myself for letting it bother me, but saying, actually, there's something in this for me to learn about myself. So
yeah, I think it's a great question to ask, and I think it's ultimately so self-accountable to say, yes, that's annoying, but why is it annoying to me? And I think it's a great question to ask, and not always shifting the accountability to the person or the situation that's annoyed you.
Everyone's doing their best, and it's not. The minute I start thinking they're all just whatever it is, they're all just incompetent, or they're all just not uncommitted, or as soon as I'm going into the alls, that's when I know it's me.
Yeah.
You know what? There's a disconnection between I'm judging other people because I'm judging something in myself.
Yeah. It's
so
a
what
great
if I could
call.
love myself when I'm not committed? What if I could love myself when I'm not that capable? That's what you're about.
Well, speaking of love, you've gone into a number of organizations and taught love leadership. How have you found the response to love leadership, the words love leadership? I'm just thinking about, the very corporate, sometimes archaic businesses. How has the response been? Have you been pleasantly surprised? Have you had to explain it?
Well, the thing is, this is just what I've been doing for 15 years, really, as a leader. So I do remember that team I ran, when I was working with you, and I remember running an offsite for them, and they're all, except one, my leadership team was all men. They're all older than me, so they were into their 50s, except for one, all older than me. And I remember saying, at the start of the offsite, I want to make sure we're a team who leads with love and magic. And old mate pulled up his hand and said, Faraci, what are you talking about when you say love? Like, what are you talking about? And knowing it would work because I'd done it before, I said to him, well, you know how every time I come to your district, no matter what time of the day or night, you pick me up from the airport, even though I can get a cab to the hotel. You know how you came to this offsite a day early so you could play golf with your peers? You know how you stay up all night with a banker to make sure the deal gets done for the client? That's love. That's what I'm talking about. That's love. That's the stuff you're not getting paid for and you could not do, but you're doing because of love. So the more we have of that, the more powerful will be the hype of the performance. So, and then everyone was saying it and it was great and, it's terrific. And love is brutal as well. And you think about your most intimate relationships with your loved ones, healthy intimacy has some really honest conflict in it, respectful conflict in it as well. That's not throwing people under the bus. That's not saying yes in the meeting, then walking out and saying, what an idiot, I'm never going to do that. It's actually saying in the moment, I can't see the reasons to be doing this. Can you help me? Or I'm just not going to do it. Like, that is love. Yeah. How does it land? Well, I adapt my approach depending on the audience. What I know is it's required. So I talk about power, I talk about performance, and if the audience, if I judge the audience not to be receptive to the word love, then I don't use it. I talk about it's the same thing, but it's leading for performance, stepping into your power, being more authentic, whatever it is. But it's all the same thing. And, some audiences love it. Like I just last month spoke at a CEO conference, the CEOs from all industries. There was 80 of them, all with their leadership teams, and they wanted me to speak on love. And so I did, and the feedback was excellent. Absolutely think there's a pull. And I mean, the more fear-based leadership we see in the world, which we're seeing right around the world at the moment, this authoritarianism, this populism, this nationalism, the more people are searching for something that's not that, and something that's unifying and ultimately, I still believe, more powerful. And here I am to provide it.
It gives me great hope for the corporate world that people are being receptive to it. You've got CEOs in there wanting to talk about it. And I think, particularly in the world of AI and everything that's happening now, it is the human side and the human connection that will ultimately win and help people outperform. I truly believe that. And so leading with love and the things that you're speaking about, I think, is critical to that. How do you well-being plays into love leadership? You touched on it a little bit before, but where do you see the intersection of well-being with love leadership?
We can't be well unless we are being ourselves. We can't. So when there's incongruity between who I actually am and how I show up as a leader or as a banker or as a person in my work, wherever I am, whatever industry, where there's incongruity, that creates unwellness. And that plays out as resentment, that plays out as anxiety, that plays out as depression, that plays out as I'm just going to leave because I can't bear the politics. You know what? Wherever you are, you put two people in a room, you're going to get politics. So politics is me judging you and you judging me and me acting less than my higher self because of that. So there is a straight line between being authentic, leading with love, brave, clear and fair, having difficult conversations, driving performance, being ruthless about who's in your team. They're all love leadership elements, and well-being. And the less you are being yourself, the less you are, the less brave you are. Where there's muddiness, where there's inequity, that will breed resentment, anxiety, depression, and they all have health effects. And I'm living proof of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful summary, Margot. I'd love to lead with a couple of things. The first one is for any leaders who might be in a fear-based culture or any emerging leaders, what practical steps would you suggest to start leading with love and cultivating positive change in their teams and organisations?
Yeah, so fear-based cultures everywhere. It's not the organisation. Like sometimes you're in the wrong place, right? But and only you can judge that. But ultimately, there will be fear everywhere you go. Mostly in Australia, it will be avoidance. So, you know, difficult things happen and they don't get dealt with. Bad behaviour doesn't get dealt with. So it's not about throwing your hands in the air and saying, well, that's just the culture. There's nothing I can do. Rubbish. Every single thing you do, every conversation you have, whether you're at the bottom of the org chart or at the top, has a ripple effect. It's like dropping a stone into a pond. The ripples emanate from there. You don't know what will come of it, but simply by having a higher intention conversation, you will enable others to do it. Number one, you will role model. Even if you think you're at the lowest of the low, you will enable other people to do it, and you will stop others in their tracks when they're about to have a low intention conversation. So practical steps. Number one, when you're feeling the fear trigger, so either, fear's fight, flight or freeze. So you either want to go and throw someone under the bus because they've done something that you perceive as damaging to you, or you want to fly away from that person because you're worried, or you just don't know what to just sit back, be with yourself, as you said, Ange. Don't talk to people at work about it unless you've got a great buddy there that you can trust implicitly. Go home and talk to someone, and talk to your partner, talk to your sister, your brother, whatever. Wash it off. And then decide what you want to do. But whatever you do, start with your highest possible good you can do. And usually the highest good you can do is thinking about the good of the business. And it's bad for the business. It creates interference in people, which drives down performance if you are not dealing with these difficult things. So think about the highest good you can do. And then when you go into the conversation, state your intention. So me going to my boss all those years ago when you and I were working together, and saying, the highest good I can do here is have a deeply trusting relationship and open relationship with you so that we can drive better business performance. Now, of course, your boss wants to bloody hear that. What boss doesn't want that? And so that's why I'm asking you, do you trust me to lead this business?
Great.
So frame it as
advice.
The highest good you can do, and state your intention. Always state your intention.
State your intention, I think, is great advice because it means people aren't wondering what the premise of the conversation is. So I think that's great advice. Where can we find you, Margot? Instagram, LinkedIn, website, where can we find you?
So I'm about to relaunch everything. Everyone look for it. Lots of content on LinkedIn, and that's for a sort of senior leader audience, but also Instagram and now TikTok. If you're thinking about how you can step into more of your own power, how you can enact love leadership, how you can have difficult conversations, please go and have a look at my socials because it's all there and freely available.
Yeah, you post great advice, and you've given us so many beautiful tips, tricks, and pieces of advice today that are relevant for many areas in our life. Any conversations we have, not just in leadership, but I think certainly in the workplace, you've given so many great pieces of advice. So thank you so much for your time. I'll put the link to all of your socials in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Ange.
Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.